Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We're glad to have you here today. And like every show, we have someone really special today, but this one is certainly something that we hadn't had before from another country over in Ukraine, actually. We have the founder of the Sons of Liberty International, Matt VanDyke, who's coming to us from an undisclosed location in Ukraine. Because he's actually helping the Ukrainians train and to fight in that war there. And Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We're real eager to hear about some of your experiences there and the things that you've seen. But just kind of for our viewers, I want to kind of set the stage so that people understand, kind of where you're coming from and just what kind of person you are. There was a 2014 documentary, Point and Shoot, an award-winning documentary, actually, and it actually featured you. And I want to show just a little bit of that really gets to the heart of who you are.
Revolution is spreading across the Arab world.
Governments have fallen in Tunisia and Egypt. Will Libya be next?
The friends I made in Libya were better friends to me than almost all my friends in America.
You are in Libya now.
One of my friends said, "Why doesn't anybody help us?" I wanted to be shaping events around me and having an impact. And now here was the Arab Spring challenging my very image of what manhood was.
Baltimore resident Matthew VanDyke is armed and fighting with rebels in Libya.
I spent 5.5 months in 2 different prisons, and it absolutely transformed me.
I had grown out of Matthew VanDyke.
Everybody tries to create their idealized image of how they want to be seen and who they want to be.
That is remarkable. I almost wish I could just watch the whole documentary right now, but man, we got you here, so we're really grateful for that. And I'm wondering if you can just real briefly just talk about the first part of the documentary. Talks about how you kind of didn't really know where you wanted to go as a young kid and then growing up. But how did you end up even landing in Libya? How would you even know or have the ability to get there and link up with people to work with them?
Well, when I got my master's degree from Georgetown in Middle East Security Studies, I'd originally intended to work for the U.S. government, and I decided to take a different path. So I got a motorcycle, and I spent 4 years traveling and filming in North Africa and the Middle East. And during that time, I was in Libya in 2008, and I made really good friends there, spent a good amount of time there. So when the war started in Libya, I was in contact with those friends, and NATO wasn't involved at that point. Nobody was helping, and they said, "Why doesn't anybody help us?" So I said, "I'll be there." And I went over, linked up with a Libyan friend that I had known for years at that point, and he was serving in the revolution. So I was able to serve in the revolution from very early on.
And what was it about these friends that made you want to risk your life to fight in a conflict? Because had you had any prior U.S. military training experience before that?
No, I had been a filmmaker, and I had filmed the U.S. military in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'd been to the range with soldiers and fired some weapons, which at that point gave me a little more weapons experience than most of the rebels I was serving with in Libya at that point at the beginning. Really, it was I'd seen the effects of authoritarianism throughout the region. I'd been in so many countries in North Africa and the Middle East. I've been detained by authorities in various countries myself just for being an American on a motorcycle. I had friends in Libya who had been detained and imprisoned for pretty much nothing. And so I knew the conditions they were in. I knew what Gaddafi had put the country through for all those years. So it was a cause I believed in. And as for the friends, Libya was the country that, of all the countries I went through on that motorcycle, the place that people treated me like a real person the most. They were nobody ever asked me for anything. Nobody ever treated me like I had anything to give them. It was a country that didn't treat me like an outsider. They welcomed me right in.
Wow.
So I had real bonds with people. So it was very personal and ideological.
That's one of the things that I think that not very many Americans who had never been to the Middle East at all really don't have a good appreciation for, because unfortunately since 9/11, so many reflexively view Arabs and Muslims in a negative light and with fear. But I had deployments to both Afghanistan and Iraq twice over the years, and had many opportunities to get to know a number of the local population, and was, as you described, was always treated with the utmost of respect, and actually have a couple of friendships which endure to this day in one particular occasion. So I'm glad that you had that experience there. But I did want to zero in on that one thing that was also mentioned in that clip that we just showed, is that you were a prisoner of war for quite a long time. And I wonder if you could tell us how that happened, how you were captured, and what was that like?
I joined the revolution very early. So really at that point, it was almost Mad Max style. You put a 50 cal machine gun in the back of a pickup truck and you head to the front as quickly as you can to hold back Gaddafi's forces, while rebel military units who had defected in the east were getting armor and heavier weapons ready. So really, there weren't that many of us willing to go. I went. We were in a Toyota Hilux with a 50 cal in a town called Brega. I was hit on the head during the capture, so I don't have an exact memory of what happened, but from a dream I had later, I believe we were ambushed. I was struck in the head. I woke up to the sound of a man being tortured in a cell above me. And from there, I was moved to Tripoli and spent nearly 6 months in solitary confinement in two of Libya's worst prisons. Before, fortunately, after about 6 months, prisoners broke the lock off my cell and I escaped with other prisoners. I stayed in Libya and went right back to the front line.
And if don't mind me asking, were you tortured during your time?
Not physically. I was attacked on a plane by an angry soldier that kicked me a bunch. But other than that, no. It was the psychological torture was the main thing, being in solitary confinement.
Yeah.
There was nothing to read, no books, no contact with the outside world. My family didn't know if I was dead or alive for that 6 months. The Libyan government hid me away and didn't admit that they had me. So really, it was just being in your own thoughts in a small cell. The first cell was about 3 or 4 feet by 7 feet for 3 months. The next cell was a little larger. Hearing other prisoners being violently interrogated or tortured in other parts of the prison. It was all of that, but I emerged from it okay.
Well, so I guess that's all. It sounds kind of easy, but man, it's hard to get past a lot of that. But so then that leads me to the next question, because it would seem like that anyone who had to endure something like that's like, okay, that's the last thing I'm ever going to do again. And yet here you are right now in another zone. And if we thought Gaddafi's folks were tough, I can only imagine what would happen if you fell into the hands of the Russian side here. Knowing that was a possibility before you went there, what is it that drove you again to go and help the Ukrainian side? I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what got you into this particular engagement.
Well, during my time in Libya, I met two journalists. One was James Foley, another was Stephen Sotloff, American journalists, who I became good friends with. And then when I was, that's a photo of James Foley and I that you're showing there, taken in Aleppo, Syria, about 2 weeks before he was kidnapped. He and another friend of mine, John Cantley, were kidnapped in Syria, and then some months later, Stephen Sotloff as well, and they were eventually in the hands of ISIS. And Stephen and James were beheaded by ISIS in 2014. So when that happened, I looked back on my experiences, my contacts in the region, and thought about what I could do to take on ISIS. So I started an organization called Sons of Liberty International, which became the first 501c3 nonprofit military training and advising firm. So we started in Iraq. We trained Iraqi Assyrian Christians to fight against ISIS. And we also did training in the Philippines to train a force to defend against ISIS there. And when Ukraine started, this was an extension of our mission. We really exist to fight against authoritarianism. And in the case of ISIS was an authoritarian regime itself. Russia backs authoritarian regimes around the world. I've also done advising to the National Unity Government in exile of Burma. We've done some covert missions in another part of the world as well. Pretty much we've been fighting Russia for years, and by fighting regimes that Russia backs. So this is an extension of that mission. We came here, started training, and now I'm in the military.
Now you're actually in the fight. And I want to spend some time talking on that, because that's one of the primary areas of focus that this channel actually discusses. And one of the whole reasons we exist is to do a deep dive to understand the issues that are going on underneath, things that they don't get on the TV screens. And we see images periodically come up about some of the fighting, or they'll say, well, here's where the front line is, and that's about the extent of it. That's all you see. So rarely do we get a golden opportunity like this to get a glimpse into what's actually happening on the ground, what's motivating the troops. And I specifically sought you out here to discuss things because there's a lot of changes going on in Washington right now, which have significant implications for the folks that you're working with there on the ground. And I want to play with you just a clip here from a Senate hearing. I believe it was yesterday by the Secretary of Defense talking about President Biden's request for $60 billion more for Ukraine. Here's how that went.
I think it's important to remind ourselves that what happens in Ukraine and what happens in Israel matters not to just Ukraine and Israel. It matters to us. It affects our national security as well. In Ukraine, Putin has felt that he could wait us out, and that's part of his strategy. It's the main part of his strategy. He feels that the West will get tired of supporting Ukraine, and he'll soon have his way. If that's the case, if we don't support Ukraine, then Putin wins. But Putin will not stop in Ukraine. We know that. We all know that. And so I think it's important to do what's necessary to support Ukraine and Israel and to help them defend their sovereign territory.
Now, Secretary Austin was emphatic and spent a lot of time talking about the Ukraine portion because, frankly, the Israel part is really an easy sell right now because it's so much in the front lines now. And in fact, since the Ukraine summer offensive sort of ended, basically about the same time the one in Israel exploded in October, all the media shifted over there. So he, I think, was trying to bring some focus back into there. But there was a poll out in Axios this morning that shows that there has been a sharp increase in the number of Americans that say we've already done too much for Ukraine, and especially among the Republicans. And that's key right now because there's a bill in the House where instead of linking Ukraine and Israel aid together, the Republican House is saying, let's separate those two and let's just focus first of all on Israel because they have the greater need. And that almost certainly is going to mean not 60 billion, but probably some smaller number. And it's unclear how many more there would be after that. So first question I would have for you is, of the folks that you're training there in Ukraine, I can't imagine that they don't watch the news. How is this impacting them, and what are they thinking this is going to mean for the future?
They're always concerned about the West cutting off the supply. It's really been essential. There's nobody here that is under any illusions about how important Western support has been to this war and to the ability to maintain a defense against Russia and to go on the offensive. So it's always a concern. I think, fortunately, just that maybe as a twist of fate, as you said, the counteroffensive is wound down now, and we're entering winter when fighting slows. So I think that the aid and ammunition going to Israel won't have too much effect on us. Those supply issues should be sorted out, and Israel will hopefully calm down around the time that Ukraine's spooling back up for another offensive.
Now, I want to talk about something here, and I'm especially as a former combat vet myself, I'm very sensitive to operational security, OPSEC, so not wanting to give anything away. But you were telling me before we went on the air that your primary role has been on training Ukrainians so far, but now you say that might be changing, and you might be joining something different. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about what the troops you have are thinking about, because I think you also mentioned that many of the people you've been training don't have combat experience. And what is that like for you and for them to be about to head to the front?
Well, I'm still running Sons of Liberty International, and we've been training since March 2022, Ukrainian forces. But on the 4th of July, I also joined the Ukrainian military myself. So that's what you're seeing there is a photo of my unit. I'm in a unit with other foreign soldiers from the United States, Chile, the United Kingdom, Australia, and more nationalities coming. We're foreigners within a Ukrainian battalion. We're an infantry unit. We're still building our size, so we've been doing quite a bit of training on Ukrainian type of warfare. So here's some photos where we were learning to mount and dismount from BMPs, learning trench warfare, learning their way. So I've kind of been a student instead of an instructor for a while recently in my own unit. But
Okay, and that's a really important question. That's something I really, really want to ask you about because when this offensive kicked off in in June, in early June, it at least from what was reported in the Western media, that the Ukrainian side had been equipped with Brads and tanks and a lot of other modern Western gear, and that they had received a lot of combined arms maneuver warfare training in NATO countries, especially in Germany, from US, UK, and several other instructors. And the intent was for them to go and basically do a US style combined arms operation and blow through these minefields and all that stuff. And, they had a lot of issues right away running into minefields and all that. And then it looked like they completely changed tactics and went with these small unit tactics where they went up in BMPs, dismounted, and then went forward. And I wonder if you have any knowledge or any experience with how that shift happened, and did they expect one thing and then shift to something else, or did they always plan on doing it this way?
well, the tip of the spear of that offensive with the Bradleys was actually a unit called the 47th Brigade, which is one that my organization trained back when they were a battalion. They later went to Germany for additional training. The problem is they didn't have air support. So they're attempting combined arms warfare without the key element of air support. So they didn't have the ability to respond quickly to incoming fire from Russian artillery and to do counter battery and to target that Russian artillery. They can't just counter battery with their own artillery quickly enough. So they ended up in minefields with the Bradleys and then got hit by artillery. And then they changed tactics. I think that when they get the F-16s, they can attempt combined arms warfare with the air support element and do a lot better at it. I think that then they might have the wherewithal to accept the casualties that come with doing a combined arms offensive like they've been trained to do. It's difficult to make that shift when they know that they don't have air support. And they don't have enough HIMARS to quickly do the counter battery either.
Yeah.
So that's really the artillery is the problem here. In addition to the fact they should have done the counteroffensive in the winter instead of waiting until summer. It gave the Russians time to entrench, to lay minefields, and that's really been the biggest obstacle, I think, was that decision to delay it.
And so now then the question, enters into what next. Let's just say for expectations that there is going to be some amount of funding from the United States in the West, whether it's to the level it was is remains to be seen, but almost certainly there's going to be some. I'm certain they're not just going to cut it off. But you had Zaluzhny come out in an Economist article earlier today that was just published, where he says, look, there's not going to be some big, beautiful breakthrough. You had Zelensky, I guess, a couple of days ago in Time magazine says, hey, point blank, without the U.S. support, we'll lose the war. And so the question that I have, especially as among your unit is getting ready to go into combat, with all that is in the background, what do they reasonably expect to accomplish, especially through the rest of the year as we're getting into the winter and potentially a winter offensive? I don't know if you guys are going to be set up for that, but how much expectation do they have to actually eventually win the war and to drive Russia out, given these constraints and their experience from this summer?
We'll have to see what difference the F-16s make. The decision for Ukraine to shift to attritional warfare is a bit troubling because of the discrepancy in population sizes and whether the West will have the wherewithal to maintain supply to Ukraine as much as Russia can produce its own supply. So, I mean, that's really going to be what decides this war. And we're going to know by this time next year where this war is going and whether it's going to be a success or not. I think when they get one more shot at a counteroffensive with air support this time, we'll have a good idea of how this is going to turn out.
So how would you characterize the morale of the Ukrainian fighters, especially the new ones that are coming in? You mentioned that a lot of them coming in without any experience at all. I guess they were mobilized. Obviously, anytime you have a general mobilization, you have a mix of people who are motivated, people who are afraid, maybe people who don't want to be there, and some who are still volunteers. How do you mesh all that together? And what if you can characterize, the morale of the units and maybe of some individuals?
The morale in the unit I serve with is good because we're all foreign volunteers. A number of them do lack combat experience, but they'll get it soon enough, I suppose. The battalion itself also is largely comprised of volunteers, so their morale is quite high. There are conscripts within the force. Obviously, morales could be a little shaken after there was a lot of faith put in a counteroffensive happening and being successful in the summer. Uh, I would say for the most part, people are still motivated enough that they want to stay, they want to fight. We're still optimistic for victory. We really have to have a good shot at a counteroffensive with air power, though, in the summer. I think that if we don't see some success in that, is when we should start talking about morale issues. But right now, morale is quite good.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because, it's, again, as somebody who's fought when, of course, my combat experience, we had every advantage in the world with all the U.S. support, the training and equipment and everything else. So it's a whole different ballgame when you're even in an equal situation, much less if you're even on the side that's tilted. It's got its own shortfalls and requires other people to rely on them. So we really admire what you're doing and of course wish you the best of luck, because I know that probably what you're doing is not so much concerned about the grander scheme of things, but about helping the people that you're working with and your the friends that you've made there. I mean, I'm just curious before we let you go, because I see we're running low on time, but what does the some of the other, especially foreign fighters that you're talking about there, what motivates and drives people to come and to do like you and to help a country that's not even of their own?
All of them are motivated by either desire to help Ukraine itself or seeing the bigger picture of preserving the international system that we've had since World War II, of countries not just seizing other countries' territory and not overthrowing democracies, and realizing what a threat Russia is to the world. Um, that's really the only thing that will get somebody to come and stay here.
Well, especially in your upcoming mission, we certainly wish you the best and would love to have you back on and tell us, kind of what happens in the next phase there. And we'll see, here in Washington, D.C., what happens with this funding here in the coming days and weeks. And we wish you the best of luck, Matt.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there for now, and we'll see what happens when the next time we're able to get Matt back on. But for now, that's it for Deep Dive, and we'll see you on the next episode.